Glad you said so.
Yeah. So welcome, everybody. My name is Nancy Schwartz, and welcome to the Art of Healthy Retirement. And I'm so excited today. We have a phenomenal person who I met at Women Own Greenwich, and we've become colleagues, and her brilliance will stand out immediately. You all will see. But let me backtrack a little bit and say that this podcast was built to support business experts who are transforming from a career into healthy retirement, or those business experts who have retired. The format is dialogue-based, and it's posted on my YouTube channel, Nancy Schwartz. So we always focus on how our guests are living or will be living in their ideal retirement with health. So no interview is the same, and that's the joy of the discussion. And we're disrupting in real time the way you think about healthy retirement. And we are especially passionate about educational content and want to offer inspiration to others by showcasing the guests living their life on their own terms. So Suzanna Narducci is an extraordinary therapist in this area, working within Connecticut and New York, who specializes in helping clients make permanent and positive change in their lives through the application of attachment theory and also neurobiology. And she's a graduate of NYU. A little plug for both of us for NYU here. With an MSW, and is a certified AEDP psychotherapist, which is an accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. And so I'm so delighted to welcome Suzanna to the program, and we're going to have a great discussion about a variety of topics. And I think when working with consultants as well as therapists, I think there is a lot of commonality, but there's also a lot of distinction between what I do and what Suzanna does. And so I really wanted to have her on the podcast, and we've waited several months because she's so busy, which is terrific, and she's traveling everywhere, really helping her clients. So Suzanna, let's talk about guiding a client, right? So both you and I do that with our passions. And for me, it's about really having the client have that successful transformation from that exhaustive, decades-long career into what they envision and design and live. But I also have a pulse on, when I initially talk to the client, that if I feel that what I call the success factor, I really want the client to be successful, that there are things in their lives that really, I believe, and maybe the client's not aware, or maybe they are aware, that they sort through that with a really qualified therapist such as yourself. So in your many, many years of practice, when should a client seek a therapist? How will they know to pick up the phone and say, Suzanna, I need to speak with you?
I feel like if people are experiencing persistent anxiety, depression, a lack of joy in your life, sometimes people aren't able to put a finger on exactly what it is, grief, to help process that. Those are the main reasons to really seek somebody out. But I would also say a deep curiosity about yourself, that therapy can be done in times of great joy, where you really want to understand what's happening to you, or you're curious about these next steps, or a time of transition, and you want to make the most and be mindful about the transition and the choices that you're making. So those would be the times I would recommend somebody seek therapy.
Great. No, I love that. And we'll put all the contact notes, how to reach Suzanna, in the notes at the end of this, and also on YouTube. So you touched upon a transformation or transition, however you'd like to define it. And certainly we know in the world of today that retirement is a dreaded word. It's known globally, universally. It's like, I don't know. And it can bring out, in my experience with myself and also with many of my clients, a lot of sadness and really depressing emotions. And I, I'm an optimist. I will call it out, but I really hold the belief, and having crossed over this divide, if you will, that transformation can be an incredible opportunity to readdress how the client, or for me and myself, the rest of their lives. So in your practice, Suzanna, what are the most common transformations that you see? And I would love to hear it from the point of view of maybe a decade or so before retirement, and then sort of during and after, sort of those years, if it's possible to pull that apart a bit.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to pull that apart, but
Okay.
I think that transformation is unique to each person. What I find, and it could be somebody in retirement, and it could be somebody who's in their 20s, and that transformation has the same qualities. So what this type of therapy does, it's an experiential body-based therapy. So we work from the bottom up. So we don't think our way down the way you used to do in traditional talk therapy. We recognize feelings in the body, and that ability to go in from a curious, non-judgmental, compassionate, both from the therapist and to the client, allows the client to be curious about themselves in a way that wasn't possible before. And that sort of peels away the onion and layers, so they get to know themselves at a deeper level. And I would say in retirement, that if this is an opportunity, I'm like you, I'm an eternal optimist. And there's always something wonderful out there. And even things that are bad, there can be opportunity woven inside of those things. So I would say just being curious, looking at yourself with compassion, having a therapist sort of ask you the right questions to help you get there, that allows the transformation to take place, because that leads you to the truth about yourself.
Yeah, I love that. The truth about yourself, right? The question is, do we want to see the truth about ourselves?
Well, yeah.
That's another
I think the answer
topic.
is actually yes, but it can be scary to go there. Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt.
And you talk a lot about grief, or we've had this conversation in retirement, and I'm curious from your point of view, in other transformations, let's just say from going, from school into a career, or career into various different companies. I don't always hear the word grief, and I've had other companies besides what I've run for. So now that I've gotten into this space, this is really a word that I'm hearing. So why am I hearing that so much in the marketplace from your expertise?
Well, I would think that, grief there can be two different types of grief. So there can be the grief of just sadness, the loss of identity of, this is who you were in the workplace. And, you no longer, that persona isn't in your day-to-day life anymore. And so that loss can require grieving as you sort of redefine yourself and expand into something even more wonderful. The second type of grief is really a grief of regret. So it can be a grief of, I wish I had had these experiences, or I didn't make the right choice here, or and that sort of has to be processed. And in that process of both types of grief, you'll end up having a truth about yourself come through. And so you may have a mourning for yourself that, if you had walked this path, this would have happened. Maybe you wanted more time with your kids. Maybe you didn't have faith in yourself to take a certain promotion. the myriad just runs. It can be anything, but really understanding yourself and self-compassion for yourself in those moments, self-compassion for what you're going through right now with this huge monumental change. And, really, hopefully some pride will come out of this
Mm.
for what you did and doing the best that you could under the circumstances. So that's sort of what we're looking for. But the client always guides. It's not that we see this phenomenologically, that when the client processes emotion, that they get to a place of gratitude. They might mourn the self. They will have a deeper knowledge of themselves. They will feel relief. These things are common across the board for everybody, but the specifics of them are individual to each person.
Yes, yes, yes. No, thank you for that. That was very instructional. So getting back to our optimistic, sometimes I'll speak for myself, crazy view of the world, but I can always find something. When you're working with clients, and you just said, the client directs the therapist, but in and around this period of retirement, if you will, how can the client think about positioning themselves into a growth mindset? Just to say that, to
Yeah,
discover the self,
yeah,
exactly what you're talking about, and really lay the foundation. I think that if I'm understanding you
yeah,
correctly, for the future, right? And
yes.
how how could we offer someone who's listening out there, beginning of a thread that they could start thinking about?
Yeah, I think there are two fundamental elements to
Mhm.
this process. And the first one is curiosity, and the second one is mindful self compassion.
Mm.
And I think it's really, you know, sitting inside yourself. And we all sort of have this white noise voice that goes on. And we're half the time we're not even aware that it's there. And it can be a very critical inner voice. And really slowing ourselves down and maybe just sitting, you don't have to do traditional meditation. It doesn't matter. But really just being in your body, just noticing how that feels, noticing the voices that might come up, like a critical voice or a voice that drives you forward, and just getting curious about that voice, in a kind way. How is this voice trying to help me? What is it, is it actually still helping? Is there another way of looking at this? So really, again, curiosity and mindful self-compassion. I view these things as sort of building a muscle that we want
Mhm.
our clients to get used to, building this muscle, almost like a Pilates class that you do
Yes.
again and again and again, and to the point where, it's easier to do it with a therapist because the therapist will guide, the therapist will help you hold some of the bigger emotions so they don't become overwhelming.
Mhm.
And also, then you get into the practice of it and you're creating new neural path. Well, the neural pathways are there, but you're actually activating neural pathways that haven't been activated. And then this does lead to a much more optimistic mindset, because as humans, we are wired to be in a joyful place, to feel connectedness, to want to live our best lives. So, we'll get there. And it's just a matter of being curious and kind to yourself.
Yeah. So I don't know if you all out there could catch that, but Susanna said we're all wired for joyfulness. So that's a huge takeaway in my book for sure. So thank you for that. It was very helpful. So you touched a little bit upon this identity shift, and it was interesting when you and I were having these conversations. I was like, man, if I only could have had Suzanna 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last year, because nobody talks about this, right? So I think that my whole thing is that I want to educate and I want to inspire. And for some reason, we learn about early childhood development, we learn about adolescence, we learn about, let's say, transition into college, or first jobs and those big promotions. You have to travel for the next job, whatever it is. But let's land on this identity shift that you defined most recently. And For me, when I'm working with clients, it's very much I accept the client where they are. And
Hmm.
then I ask them, okay, where do you want to go? What is it? And then how we formulate the identity shift could be found in things such as values. Often these change from my point of view, passion, purpose, etc., spiritual awakening, connections, or larger impacts on society. But in your practice, what do you see as some of the most dynamic, identity shifts if we're talking about this population base of this in and around retirement?
I would say, and again, it crosses across all age groups. Um, Most people already have a sense of agency,
Mm-hmm.
maybe really appreciating. I always look for that. We want to have what we call the agenic self come forward. So that's a basic one. We also want to make sure that people are fully expressing love in their life, the ability to give. I think these are fundamental experiences that as human beings we need to have to get to the end of our lives and feel like we've done what we need to do, whatever that undefinable thing is. We know when there's a sense of satisfaction in
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Yeah.
I would say to love and be loved, to have a sense of connectedness. You and I talked about Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
Yes, and then I went and read the book, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So I loved, he doesn't want to look for suffering, but suffering will. Everybody gets a dose of it every now and then. And, how do we make good meaning of it without
Mm-hmm.
looking? We don't want to martyr ourselves. But I think most of all, and what we are wired to do again, is we want a sense of connectedness. We want to feel connected to ourselves. We want to feel connected to nature. We want to feel connected to each other. And we may be something greater than ourselves, the universe, however you want to put it. And that's the big umbrella. And under that, I think you find agency to get there, to say, I can go and do this, which I think is very important. And I think retirement is a huge opportunity to say, oh, I get a second chance. We're living longer than we did before. We're more active than we ever were before. So I get to go out and do this. And then really looking like the relationships in my life. What do I want that to be? I think that's hugely important. And how do I want to be in the world, and how can I make the most of that? So this sort of reflective time that we can use to get us where we're actually hardwired to go, but sometimes need a little bit of help to get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that your guidance, um, pulling away from just this is my experience, but that it's a human universal experience as you're expressing this, is so reassuring for those that would be listening. It's not just happening to me, but that
Yes,
it's a common thread, right? Again,
absolutely.
where's that manual? I never got that. So
Yeah.
that's
No,
what I
it's
have to
true.
say.
Like we didn't. I mean, I can think of multiple times in my life where I should have been in therapy when I was younger, and it would have made a huge life change. And certainly what you do in terms of helping people really envision a healthy retirement, I think is huge as well, because we want those times of mindfulness to sort of
Mm,
bring and help us sort of recalibrate. What direction are we going on? And let's be conscious about that. Let's make conscious, mindful decisions that we now have more life experience to influence that than we did when we were in our 20s or 30s, even.
yeah, no, I love that. Thank you. That's really wonderful. Let's jump ponds, if you will, and let's talk about ageism. And I'm a big stickler about that. Certainly in my retained search world, I
Yeah.
felt, and not only ageism, but diversity were really big if you will, categories
Yeah.
that I couldn't identify with. And because I didn't know why it was a thing, even though it was a thing, right? And I think that, of course, the commercialism in ageism, we'll go back to ageism, and also in diversity, is that it's really propelled in the youth the youthful, everything is youthful. You turn on the TV, you go to the newspaper, you go into films. It's always the beautiful one, right? And yet I'm very hopeful, Suzanna, that we're changing in terms of diversity, and we're changing in terms of ageism.
Yeah.
And do you in your practice and what you've observed, and you're in your marketplace, you know this inside and out, do you believe that there are societal beliefs, and do you feel a momentum changing in the marketplace, specifically around aging and this really thoughtful word of longevity, that we are living longer and longer, but in quality, right? That, our life and our health span and will continue, so that we are not in our 50s or 60s dying, but that we are really vibrant, for lack of a better word, individuals who can contribute.
I think ageism does exist. I think women, it's even worse. That traditionally women have become invisible as they've gotten older. And like you, I take issue with that. So,
good. Okay, thank you.
welcome. Especially as we age. So I actually think that because we're living longer and we are vibrant and we are dynamic, that this is there. But also the reality is that we're here and we're active and we have a voice. And ultimately everybody, if they're lucky, is going to be in this place aging. So I actually believe that it's up to our generation to be dynamic, to step forward, and especially women, not to be invisible. And that we have to acknowledge what goes on in society, and that it's frustrating. I'm not saying it's not there, but that we have to take some responsibility too, in that I feel like it's our job, like this podcast, to women who are on the older side, who are having a voice and putting a voice and a point of view out there. And I think that as we age, and especially as women, we should continue to do this. And the only way to change things is to participate actively in being part of the solution. So I feel like that's part of what I want to do as I get older is, how do I participate in the world? And how do I keep my voice relevant in a way that helps other people, and that my kids will inherit a new view of what aging is?
Yeah. That's why I'm really about disruption.
Yes.
And I have always been about disruption, because I see it, but I see a way through it, but I don't know how yet, but I just, we're pushing, and
we'll make it up as we go along. We're just
exactly.
I think we just get out there and do it and see what happens and raise consciousness about it. Like, the more we say it, and, this group that we're both in, I think is so important, for women's voices.
Yes, I agree.
Right.
And I just also want to make sure that I include, I'm learning as much from the young ones,
Yes, absolutely.
As well as the more sage and brilliant individuals that I know. So it's constant with the hat of, wow, what can I learn now at this moment? How can this help not only myself, but many others? How can I spread that word, or mentor or teach, or deliver a little bit of humor to the situation at hand? So, yeah.
And I love what you said about, like we gain from across the age span. And it's our job. The world is changing very quickly. And, I remember my parents sort of like losing touch with certain things. Like keeping up with technology is really difficult at a certain point. When you're like, I don't even want to do this. It's too much. And I remember my parents not being able to do, like the younger generation's not even going to know what it was, but not being able to program a VCR and thinking, oh my God, you're idiots.
Right.
And I'm sure that my kids think the same thing, but I think our job is also to be very curious about their experience in the world. Really try and understand what they're going through and how they're going through it. And I think that also keeps us relevant. Like we really want to have this connectedness between everybody. and an understanding of what happens, because our connectedness to them keeps us close to them. Their connectedness to us also keeps them close to us, but also in a way it helps them pave what it is to get older. And we're sort of in the sandwich generation. Some of
Yes.
us are lucky enough, although it's can be very hard work for some of us to have our parents still alive, and then we have kids. And so I'm seeing myself looking, to the generation ahead of me, and they're teaching me how to grow old gracefully, which
Mm.
I find so interesting. And also they have stories that I want to capture now before it's too late.
Mhm.
And then how do we pass some of those values and traditions down that are good ones to
Mhm.
the younger generation? And then how do we hear the new thinking of the younger generation and pass that up so that we're really all engaged in what's going on and trying to make the world a better place?
Yeah. No, I love that. It's a two-way street. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a lot of highways and byways and roundabouts, but we get there. We get there
Yeah. Eventually, hopefully.
eventually. So, I love that. And, I heard this, I love listening to podcasts, and I'm a big, subscriber to a lot of the health piece, as well as the retirement piece, because that's really what I'm about. And I'm a big fan of Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Not only is he a practicing physician, everybody knows he's correspondent for CNN and did such a spectacular job in COVID. I mean, I don't know how his legs were
Yeah.
keep on a going, but he was amazing. And I listened to the sweetest, very tiny podcast where he interviewed, and I don't know if you heard it, but he interviewed his parents to ask them, and this is exactly what you're saying, Suzanna. He's asking them, how is aging? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? It was just absolutely adorable. Father had a very particular view, and the mother had an opposite view. And she they're both extraordinary, but the mother in particular was the first woman engineer at Ford. So she's
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
And so was the father, so was the son,
Yeah.
etc. An amazing family. But at the tail end of this, he brought in a Yale expert, Dr. Becca Levy, and she really talked about her life's work is about how the view of positive and negative cultural stereotypes really can impact our health, and how we think about it from an individual point of view. And I love this question, and I'd like to ask this question of you. Dr. Gupta asked Dr. Levy, and we've almost touched upon this word wisdom. So we're almost there in this interview. But I think there's wisdom in the young ones, and I think
Mhm.
there's wisdom throughout. But I don't want to shade your answers. So Dr. Gupta asked Dr. Levy, so if you were to think of an older person, and I'd like, her response was that she felt, in 4 words, what characteristics would they be possessing? And so she said wisdom, creativity, and their stories, the stories that are very creative within their lives, generative, right?
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
on, which I loved, and warmth. Interesting
Oh,
word.
yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you think about your practice and you think about those that you are around in your practice, if we think about really people in and around retirement, what words come up for you in terms of the qualities? If you could give me 2 to 4 words, what are the qualities that this generation has, again, to be able to contribute to this
Yeah.
very circular pattern that we've been talking about?
Well, definitely wisdom is what
Mm.
is out there. I also think that this generation is incredibly dynamic. I think they are grateful I think they've recognized a lot of blessings in their lives and
Mhm.
are hugely grateful for them. And the other, to put it into a word, but it needs a little bit of explanation, would be philanthropic, but meaning that they really they care about leaving the world a better place. And I don't know if that's recognized as much, but they might have different political points of view, but either way, they're caring about the world and how it's landing, and where it's going. And I think they want to participate in making it better through, donation of time or money or whatever they happen to have in terms of resources.
Yeah, I've seen that. It's interesting that you use that word because I've seen that among my colleagues,
Yeah,
definitely. So
yeah,
it's very interesting. So uh, you and Dr. Levy touched upon this wisdom piece. So let's continue the thread with wisdom. And I've heard you say in some of the notes that we've exchanged that when therapy works, the therapist becomes the guide, which I
yeah.
love, who helps the client access deep levels of innate wisdom.
Mhm.
And wisdom is really becoming a thing because so many people are writing books about it. Chip Conley's coming out with something in January, and all these talking heads are talking about how to access wisdom.
Yeah.
But from your point of view, and as the technical expert here, why do you believe that wisdom is so revered? Because for centuries, if you think about ancient texts and philosophers back in the
Right.
Greek and Roman times, wisdom was really cultivated from the, if you will, the elders
Yes.
in their
Yeah.
societies. So
Yeah.
why is this a quality that's so revered?
I think certainly in our culture today, it implies a deep sense of knowingness, like an internal deep sense of knowingness. And I think that when we actually experience that level of grounded knowingness about ourselves, what we would call our core self, and what's fascinating to me is that phenomenologically, what we know in the different models that we use, that there's actually a connection to some of the really old ancient traditions in many ways. And we also recognize it inside polyvagal theory too.
Mhm.
So it becomes a connectedness to ourselves and to something greater than ourselves. So, I don't want to throw a religious belief on it. That's, up to the individual to figure out. But it is, when we're in a landed, grounded place where we're sitting inside our wise core self, we're often in a state of flow and everything just sort of
Hmm.
comes together so beautifully. And it's incredible. It's not like we're going to live in this space all the time, but the type of therapy that I do has the capacity to get people to that, have it. Sometimes it's a glimmer of it, um, experience, and sometimes they can really sit in it for a while. And if we recognize it and know what it is, we want to do it again and again. But I think, to answer your question, I think it's just hardwired into us to want to get to this place. I think it's
Mhm.
important for us to have this experience and to operate from this as much as possible.
Yeah, so I love that, hardwired into us and to operate, from that state of flow, really, that you're
Yes.
talking about, um, as much of the 24 hours of the day that we can
Exactly.
possibly. That'd be off. That would be awesome, but
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. That would be, I don't know if as humans we quite have that capacity
right.
yet,
We'll
but
we'll work on it. We'll
we're
work on
working on it.
it.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so interesting to me because when I was thinking about, I was so excited that you were coming on today, and I was thinking about it in the train, and I was thinking about this word wisdom, and I did come to the word knowing, but I also came to the word questioning. And I thought it was for me, it's at the intersection of knowing, but also knowing when to ask the right questions,
Yes,
get to a
absolutely.
better knowing. So I don't know, I just throw that out on the table, because sometimes, I think a lot of times in my life, I had no idea what the questions were, what I should be
Yes.
asking, because I had no foundation really, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, thank you, Metro North. So there you go.
No, I love the questions, and that's part of the curiosity,
Yeah.
right? And I think that we're always gonna be in a state of growth. That's we live in time. So time is going to we can't help but grow because we're moving forward through time. So
Mm,
in order to do that, we're just gonna flow back and forth between a sense of groundedness, knowing, and then we're gonna go back to questions as we have more life experience. And I think that we should always be holding on to questions and curiosity and self-compassion, and that will lead to the deep knowing and the wisdom. But it's like almost the infinite. We're never going to totally get there, so we're going to keep going back and forth through that.
mhm. No, I love that. And for those of you who are will hear this rather than see this, Susan drew sort of a half a 8 going through these different. So it's very cyclical, right? It's just like
Yes,
a beautiful
exactly.
little wave going back and forth. So I love the architecture of the design of the answer. So
You're
thank you for
welcome.
that. So let's switch gears now, and I think emotional reconnection is also part of wisdom, right?
Mhm,
But
mhm.
I think so much today, and I certainly was a product of this, and many of my clients have been a product, or are still a product of this, are that we're living in survival mode. We live near New York. It's a go, go, go. It's a city that never sleeps. It's that kind of thing. And only when something, in my case, and I'm going to want to ask you in your case, when there's a huge shift in terms of a transformation or an event of some sort, does some sort of emotional connection or reconnection occur? So how do you work with your clients? How do you connect with the client so that they can access their emotions? And I think this is a really big topic,
Yeah,
particularly in the corporate world, because we are taught never to show our emotions, or at least that's how I was taught.
right.
It wouldn't matter, family crisis, nope,
Yeah,
get in that meeting or get on that plane, or
get it done.
whatever the situation was. It was always a high performers were expected to
Yeah,
perform highly, period, end of
yeah.
story. So talk about that connection that you are so you have such ease with your clients to connect them. I'm sure people will be very curious how you do it.
Well, this is what I'm loving about psychotherapy today and how it has changed in the last 10 years, really. And that it used to be we do talk therapy, and you could talk until the cows came home about what your childhood was, why you have the behaviors that you do, but you wouldn't actually be able to change them in the moment. And what has changed now is that we actually work, I alluded to it earlier, is we go into the body. So we work from the bottom up that way. And what people don't realize is that emotion is felt in the body first, and then it's processed in the head, and sometimes not even accurately. Like, you might know
Mhm.
things off, but you might be translating it completely inaccurately. So that's also where mindfulness comes in. And one of the so there's a vagus nerve that runs from, down in your stomach, all the way up through your heart and into the back of your head. And that's the nerve that will throw us in in a millisecond, before we've even had conscious thought to it, throw us into fight flight,
Mhm.
And when there's too much fight flight, it will put us into depression. So, like in COVID, we're all buying toilet paper, we're all running around with masks on and social distancing, doing everything that we can to keep ourselves and our families safe. And then some people went into depression because they couldn't take the anxiety anymore. And we want, and many of us were actually intuitively trying to achieve, although the anxiety was so overwhelming at times, was a sense of connectedness to the world. And so in therapy, what we're doing is we're helping the clients get into the body. They feel the emotions in the body, they notice them. And that felt visceral sense will often bring up a felt memory that might have been forgotten. It might bring up it might bring a deepening of the emotion. And then emotions sort of get processed. And when we drop down, and we clear what would have traditionally have been called defenses, but now in the models that I work in are referred to as parts of ourselves. So we've all got different parts. We have this language in our lives today. It doesn't mean, that you have multiple identities or anything like that. It just means that there are different parts of ourselves. And the more we get to know these parts, the more conscious we are about our decision-making abilities. And so rather than before, we would sort of say, oh, there's this part of you that had to work really, really hard. And it was probably, and maybe we've discovered it's related to something from childhood or whatever. And that part will give a lot of empathy to, and saying, wow, what was that like for you? Separating out the part. And when the part is separated out, we can't be blended with it. So we're actually able to see what's going on more clearly. It slows us down, just the act of going into our bodies. And then when the emotion is ready to be processed, that goes through like a wave. It never lasts more than really 3 minutes. 5 would be tops. A minute would be more likely. And you know that you've processed it when the client is feeling relief. And then there's an adaptive action afterwards, or a deeper knowing of the self, or both. And then that leads us into processing that experience cognitively and back in the body again, just back and forth, back and forth. And that develops this new knowledge. And all of a sudden, the client finds that they're doing all the talking, and they're getting to this place of deep wisdom and deep knowledge and deep understanding of themselves. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. It doesn't go so quickly because
I
there's a
can
lot of work
imagine.
that's going on in between. But that is the process, and that is how it is different than it is in the traditional talk therapy. I think it could happen in talk therapy, but there might not be consciousness as much with the psychotherapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard, I don't know anything about anything, but I've heard, of course, in the marketplace, frustration with talk therapy, as
Of
you
course. Yeah.
alluded to, because it's a
Yeah.
lot of talking. But
Yeah.
here in this model, it appears that there's really, if you will, a methodology or a process,
Yes. Yes.
that where you guide as the client will be leading you into whatever
Yeah.
the discussion is about, and ultimately, through very hard work on both sides, there's a resolution. And so,
Yes.
to me, that sounds incredible,
Yeah.
because we all know that a lot of these, what did you say? What did you say? It was the parts used to be called something. What did you
Oh,
say?
the defenses and
Defenses. So
right.
the defenses, thank you. The defenses are often before the have arrived in the person, or mapped in the person, if
Right.
you will, um, early childhood, and most people
Yeah.
don't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that they're building this textural map as they continue to live. And
Yeah.
so, the fact that you can resolve, I think that's, again, this is incredible breakthrough,
Oh,
in terms of the what should we say, the science of evolution of therapy, for
yes.
people who can utilize this in helping themselves their families, their colleagues, et cetera, et cetera.
It is truly remarkable. I mean, I think that we're seeing this new age of, so what Freud did to change the world, I think that we're seeing the people who have sort of understood and done the research behind all these different models. There's AEDP, there's IFS, there's EMDR, there's somatic experiencing. I mean, these are just some of them. There's EFT. And the people behind these models are giving us something new. We are now able to actually make that permanent positive change. We know where we are on a map with the clients. And we also, you don't want to, we're not getting rid of parts. It's just that, and the parts of ourselves may be wonderful. There may be a joyful part that learned to ride a bicycle, or, and we want to embrace the joyfulness and the goodness. I mean, it's not all about negativity. In fact, more joy and more neural pathways leading to joy, the better. But it's really understanding those parts, the roles that they had to take, maybe burdens that were placed upon them, that they shouldn't have been carrying. And then what's really wonderful is when watching a part it sounds crazy, but it happens. And it's so wonderful when it does. And so a part can metamorphosize into what it should have been. So a part that was severely burdened as a child, all of a sudden we do a lot of, I call it imaginal work versus imaginary work. And we're creating in our brain a new experience. So we can, so this happens organically. The client might be asked, like, what would this part like to do? Now this part knows that it no longer has to worry about this. And the part all of a sudden will be doing an age appropriate thing that the part should have been doing, but couldn't do at that time. And that transformation is phenomenal, just watching that. And that piece then allows the client to get into a core centered place because they don't have all this sort of white noise going on in the background.
Yeah, so it must, you must see amazing client growth and healing in your sessions that I'm sure the clients are amazed by. I go back to the human body is just so amazing, right?
Yes.
So how could, let's say I show up at your door and I've got a lot of damage somewhere, somehow.
Yeah.
Then someday I can leave your office and not only am I healed, but I'm growing and I'm moving into something else, a new experience. I mean, it just must be so rewarding for both parties.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm truly honored to do this work and grateful as well. And and you can't help but really adore your clients because you end up knowing there's just this vulnerability that is just, and it's precious.
It is precious. And, it's interesting you use the word vulnerability because that's coming more and more out into leadership terms in terms of companies leading vis-a-vis vulnerability versus,
that's interesting.
I'm the CEO, go, it's like, no, wait, hang on. So, the real sharing of the why and how, if the company is in crisis or if it's not, it's doing well, but they're doing, to be able to surround it builds the collective more, the collective culture, because there's a belief that, oh, this guy's the real deal. And, oh, he had a bad day. Oh dear. Well, let's support him. Or, oh, we're turning right, but it almost in the weakness of vulnerability shines the strength of that leader through. It's an amazing word, and it's an amazing word. So it was interesting that you use.
That's so interesting that they're bringing it into the corporate structure. I always suggest to clients that, if they're having an argument with their partner, that they lead with vulnerability. And also, I think just in our day-to-day lives, that when it's appropriate and you don't want to overdo it, being your authentic self, sort of that also settles people down and makes people grounded and safer with you, in the plural you, in our day-to-day experiences.
Yeah. It's so interesting. We're human, but we're multi-humans inside of one human.
Oh my God, no, absolutely. We are multitudes. It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be honored.
So I want to touch base on something that I love and that you talk about and that you were trained extensively in is theories
Yes.
that come true. And they're really fundamental to not only your technique and practice, but I think it's something that um, even like international aid agencies and like the WHO and the United Nations for quite disaster situations. But in this neurobiology that you've talked about and this attachment theory, which is becoming very popular, love, safety, and belonging, right? And
Yes.
they really matter in children, in seniors, in world leaders, in the common man, common woman, and why in what has been your observation in your practice of why does that matter so much?
Oh, it's fundamental to the practice. So we are hardwired to attach as infants. And if we don't, we die. So obviously that was plugged into us. And if we don't feel safe in relationships, in the therapeutic experience, it's very hard for us to stay grounded. That's when all the parts or defenses are
Mm-hmm.
coming up. So to use the example in therapy, my job is to, as much as possible, make the client feel safe. And if I'm not able to, become really curious about what's going on. And together we sort of look at it and sort of really want to create a secure attachment inside the therapeutic experience, because it's that secure attachment in our lives that lets us live our life from a grounded state that leads to wisdom, deep self-knowledge, all of that. We're able to get rid of the white noise. And it having therapy is sort of the training wheels for that, so that we were able to then take this earned secure attachment out into the world and use it in your everyday relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what's life-changing about it. And the only way to really get to that work that I was talking about being in the body, learning about the different parts of yourself, dropping down into a core emotional state. You can't do that unless you're feeling safe with somebody. You have to believe that person is curious, compassionate, open-hearted, and is willing to sit with you in those emotions. And if you don't get that, you won't be able to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, no, I love that. I think it's such important work to establish that
Yeah.
in my opinion, but I was just very curious into your experience. Yeah, you hear about that very much of inner city kids and how
Yes.
upbringing. I have many friends who have been teachers in schools, and I hear all these stories, and it's just like, wow, this is I never learned this in school, and I'm sure many other kids haven't never learned this either, right? So to be able to impart that for the child to look for something like that, uh,
Yeah.
so in your words, so that you can, once you have ownership or agency over this, to be able to go out into the world and be able to find it again with either a person or a company or
How do we create safe environments for our children? I mean, this is not my area of expertise by any means, but all kids have gone through, I mean, collectively, we've all gone through the trauma of COVID. And
Mhm.
if you had a parent that was on the front lines, be it in a hospital, could have been a doctor, could have been a nurse,
Sure.
could be somebody at the grocery store, could be somebody running public transportation, and
Right.
you don't have the means to take care of your kids. It was hard enough for the kids who had all the advantages. but kids who are struggling on multiple levels, um, it was devastating for them. And I think that we're sort of seeing some of what's happening in the schools now. And how do we help these kids start to feel safe? How do we help create safe environments? Because I doubt that good learning can happen if we don't. And I don't know if there's a corollary for this. It's not my area of expertise, but it seems that ADHD has increased tremendously. I wonder if there's a connection between anxiety, there must be, and ADHD, and why we're seeing that. And how I think we kind of need to pivot a bit and think about that.
Yeah.
Again, not my area. I'm very curious about it,
Yeah.
but
I not my area either, but it's very, very interesting talking about um, um, learning and how in the world can anybody learn, a child, an adult,
yeah,
a nursery school child, an elder, if you're in this state of fight or flight. It's impossible.
right.
I just think back to my small existence here, and how I can pick out certain times where it was like, oh my gosh, I read that paragraph 3 times. What
Yes,
did I read? I don't know
exactly.
what I read,
Exactly.
because Nancy, get a hold of
No,
yourself, get
precisely. That's
focused,
exactly right. That's what happens.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
very kind of levitating, and it's like, yeah, so yeah. Um, Very interesting subject. I have to go find someone who can answer that question for us now.
Yes.
Now you.
I'll watch.
Okay, all right, you're on. Um, Tools. Tools is a big word now in certainly my consulting world, and I'm sure in your world, or a similar type of word. And what would you say? I've heard you say this curiosity piece. I've heard you say this very much self-compassion words. Any other tool that you would suggest for a client that's in and around this environment to start looking for, to start acquiring, that can build a very strong transformation that would support, let's say, support a very strong transformation from one side of the pond to the other?
If I would say if the client feels comfortable, you could scan your body and just notice what comes up. What are you feeling in the pit of your stomach? What are you feeling in your heart? What are you feeling in your fingers, your toes? And just notice. So just slowing down,
Mm.
noticing from a stance of curiosity and compassion, self-compassion. And I would say that slowing down, noticing what's in your body, not judging it, being with it, watch it fade in and fade out. That would be the basic tool in order to move forward with all of this and just develop that sense of curiosity, that noticing the felt sense energetically or in your body, if that feels comfortable to you, and be with yourself.
Mm.
See what happens.
Yeah, see what happens. But I love that. I love that concept of slowing down, because we're talking about, we're going back to, the fight or flight. We're going back to slowing down, and to really, as a dancer, having been a professional dancer, I'm still loving movement. Even with all the training that I have had and my friends, getting people to slow down in this society is
Yeah.
so challenging. Yet, here's the, again, wisdom of the body. When you can really listen and take
Mhm.
some time, I love this exercise. I hope people who are listening will try this, because I think it's very instructional. And each day will reveal something else. I've never really done this. While it's the same type of exercise, I've never really had the same result, because I'm a different person each day,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
like you said, we're constantly growing and
Mhm.
um, healing and moving toward a new
Yeah.
day, if you will. So yeah, I love that. So I'm sure you've read all the newspapers and heard all the hoopla about AI. So I'm curious to ask you about a territory that may or may not come to your world. But I think it has some really interesting application and could support our mental health. And the reason I say this, and I haven't listened to it, but Reid Hoffman, who's the an investor, has a podcast out now that has several AI tech wonders talking about what AI could do that would be for the good of humanity. And I thought this is so interesting. And they were particularly talking about grounding people through kindness and gratitude.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I haven't listened to it, but if and we're such. I was just driving here, and I was on the radio in the car, and the chief medical officer of New York City had come on, and he was advocating that we are at a crisis in New York City for mental illness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Teens in particular, they were talking about, but I walk the streets in Manhattan, and I can say that it's more than just teens.
Yeah.
So what do you see down the road that AI could do to develop something in AR? Maybe you know of companies that are developing things that
Yeah,
you could share with us.
I don't, and I'm not well versed on this topic by any means. I would say that certainly there's a huge need for mental health. Um, and support, and it's recognized now. There's not the stigma that there was before. So, and it's expensive. It's hard to
Very
do.
expensive.
It's very expensive, and so it's not accessible to everybody. And yet, there should be more accessibility somehow. So certainly, an AI platform. There's huge potential in that. I can see that the possibility of that and the good in it. I have doubts that the level of facial recognition, I think that there's just something so special that happens between the therapist and the client, that when the therapist is deeply present with the client, and there's been research about this. There's a woman called Beatrice Beebe who does this, and Ed Tronick has a video that's very old, but Beatrice Beebe does these slides where she's videotaping babies and mothers, and she also videotapes clients, and I've seen therapists, and the movement that happens, that when you're really deeply with somebody, that you're reading something in them that you're not even processing because it's happening in milliseconds. When the tape gets slowed down, you see things that you didn't see, but yet your unconscious is actually reacting to it. And then there's another piece of research, or a lot of research now, I think, around mirror neurons. And that is our ability to sort of intuit. It's how we learn language. I think they've proven that. It's also, I think, when we have babies, that we know what they want intuitively. When I'm with a client, sometimes I'm feeling something in my gut or my heart, or I might feel tears before they feel tears that they haven't accessed yet. I don't know for sure that that's true. I'm always going to ask and say, I'm feeling this right now. I'm wondering what's happening for you. It is that level of intuition and that connectedness through intuition that we're beginning to define, but haven't quite defined, that I don't know, if a machine can get there, then maybe I'm a little scared. But right now, I don't think we're close to that level of what you can get out of therapy. That said, I do think that there will be good applications for AI in helping people. But again, I would be cautious because I would be very curious about what unintended consequences might happen. So, it's a big, interesting question. I'll be curious to see how it unfolds.
Yes, me as well. It's sort of parallels these self-driving cars.
Yes.
So we're not there yet, but we're we're getting there, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunity, as you say.
Yes.
There's also tremendous
And need.
and huge need,
Yeah.
massive market
Yep.
need,
Without a doubt.
global massive market need.
Yeah.
But also there's something intrinsic about having that live human side by side
Yeah.
that is really that pulse speed in the room that can really guide that client more so at the moment than the software
Yeah.
has proven. But
What
I hold hope. We'll talk in what do you think? 10 years, 15
10
years?
years. Yeah.
10
Yeah. I
years.
think we'll start to see stuff in 3 to 5, but I think in
Mhm.
general, really, it will be on another planet. And just to say, because it's so interesting, because therapists are talking about this all the time, like since
Mm.
COVID, a
Mhm.
lot of us have gone online. I'm primarily online. And
Mm.
the question was, what's that going to be like?
Oh.
And are we
Mhm.
going to be at the same level of therapist presence in that way? And my experience of it, and quite a few of my colleagues, in fact, many, and now they're having research that verifies it, that online, it's a different experience for sure, but you're not getting any less therapy. It might be different. You're actually, because we're like right now, we're face to face, we're
Yes.
just top up. So we're in a way disembodied, which is a little bit weird. But so I'm not getting all of your body language, but I'm getting like, if I was really to go into my therapist mode and start to
Mhm.
really look and start reading your emotions very, very in a moment to moment tracking way, I can see more this way than I could with somebody in my office.
Mhm.
So, but it doesn't mean you get other things. So it's both and are good. I actually think having um doing both live and Zoom would be probably the way to go. But everybody has a different opinion and it's so unique to each therapist. And what we're learning is there's no right or wrong, but that human connection does work over the internet.
Yeah. It's
It's
interesting.
crazy. Who knew?
Right, right. Who knew? And it's another application, a software application that
Yeah.
I think probably Zoom or any of the other softwares never anticipated.
Yes.
And I think I told you I'm part of this functional medicine group that I absolutely adore. And
Yeah.
some of the functional medicine people who also have their modalities access mental health situations have found the same thing. So I'll just echo what you were
Yeah.
saying, that they were also very cautious about that and saying, I'm not sure. But they found that they could adapt, both
Yes.
client and therapist, and then kind of learn. And they're finding it right now. No one's rushing back to, turn it off. In other words,
No, right?
they're staying the course. Yeah.
And it offers accessibility. So when we think about like, there's like places where there are a lot of really good psychotherapists, but they're not across the country. It's not evenly
Correct.
spread across the country. So people are licensed from state to state, and you can't work with somebody who is not licensed in the state that you actually live in. I I kind of feel like we should have a national licensing policy because it
Mm.
would offer more accessibility to people. But right now, even from state to state, like I'm licensed in Connecticut and New York, and that offers me the ability to serve everybody in 2 states. And there are places with less accessibility in both states, so that is something.
Yes, yes, that herein, I highly doubt that the CEO of Zoom would have ever thought that while they were making the software, but bravo to them, right? And then
Yeah.
the other companies as well. So Susanna, I just want to thank you for such gracious a conversation and time, and I've learned so much in speaking with you, and I'm curious, any last thoughts for our audience, and how do we get in contact with you if our audience needs to reach you? And again, it's just been such a privilege to speak with
Well,
you. Thank
Thank
you.
thank you, Nancy. This has been just such an honor, and I always love talking to you. The conversations never cease to be interesting and fun, and so thank you for the opportunity. Last thoughts, just like you, I'm an eternal optimist. I think we're hardwired for joy. I think we're so lucky to have, the potential of an extended life, and really making the most out of, where we're going, and be mindful about those choices, whether you go to therapy, whether you go to you, whether you do both, or whether you just do your work on your own. Really embracing life and the joy. And there's sadness and grief too, without a doubt, some often significant for people.
Mhm.
But I guess really good therapy can lead us to being able to hold all of that at the same time. Sometimes the proportions are a little different, but
Mhm.
that's ultimately the goal. And where to reach me, the best way is, I have a website. It is therapywithsuzanna.com. Will you put this in writing?
Oh,
On
yes. No, I'll
Yeah,
put it in the show notes. Absolutely.
excellent.
On YouTube at the bottom, where to contact you. Absolutely.
Yes.
So that's it, just the website
So the
address?
website and the email is the other way to reach me.
Okay, which
So
is?
SN for Suzanna Narducci at therapywithsuzanna.com. So
Well,
that's it.
I thank you. Your phones will be
Thank you.
ringing, I am sure. And thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate your very, very thoughtful answers. And we also ask the audience if they have any questions to write us. I will certainly make sure that Suzanna maybe will come on again to answer the questions, or we'll pick another subject to talk about. But again, thank you, and everybody have a great weekend. We so
Thank
appreciate
you.
you listening. Thank you.